Hi everyone, and welcome to the video lesson for Unit 8, Phylum Annelida. During the first part of this unit, we are going to briefly discuss the adaptations found in Phylum Annelida and take a look at their place in our current understanding of evolutionary relationships. Before we begin, we are going to do a quick activity called Guess the Truth. The rules for this activity are pretty simple. I'm going to show you a series of images that either have something to do with annelids or not. Your job is to look at the image and identify what is common between the images that have a yes title or what could be missing or not true from the no images. In your course reader is space for you to work alongside and fill in a response for each image. Try to keep your responses short, 5 words or less. We'll do the first yes and first no together. Remember, there's no right or wrong answers here. This is just a way for you to practice your observational skills. At the end of the exercise, you will have time to compile your yes characteristics and remove any characteristics from the no column to see if you can define what an annelid is. So take a few seconds and take a look at our first yes. What do you notice about this thing? First, I noticed a rubber band looking structure. This is called a clitellum. Could all annelids have this structure? Maybe. Looks like we're going to have to move on and learn more. You could also have written that it looks like a worm, or that it has little rings, or that it is on land. Choose one thing and let's move on. Here we are at our first no. Something, or maybe more than one thing about this creature is not consistent with annelids. What do you think it could be? Jot down a couple of ideas in your no column. For me, I noticed its erratic movement. Annelids really aren't known for this kind of wriggling. You may also have noticed that this animal is a worm but lacks those rings. The no category will help you narrow some things down. Use the yes pictures for new ideas and the no column to eliminate ideas. Think you've got it? Let's do a few more. Feel free to stop the video at any time. So, how did you do? Take a minute or two and combine your answers into a definition for annelids. Compare your responses to the textbook response coming up. Now it is time to delve a little deeper into the adaptations of annelids and their role in the animal kingdom. Annelids are probably the most recognizable phylum of worm and include the metameric or segmented worms. Annelida roughly translates to little rings, which is a fitting name considering how the segments all appear like interconnected little rings. These worms are all bilaterally symmetrical and have that worm-like appearance. These worms are triploblastic coelomates that develop from a spiral cleavage early in development. We talked a little bit about spiral cleavage and schizocoelous coelom development back in our unit on mollusks, so if you want a quick refresher, make sure you check out our last unit. What is perhaps most easily recognizable is the presence of the trochophore larva. This larval form isn't present in every annelid, but it is pretty common, especially in a group called the polychaete worms. Pictured here is a trochophore larva of a polychaete worm. You can already see the presence of the ring-like segments budding from the anterior region of the larva. Worms in class Clitellida develop from a cocoon and do not exhibit the trochophore larva stage. A notable characteristic of annelid worms are the presence of setae. These bristle-like structures enable species of worms to grip their substrates and move the worm throughout a burrow or a tube. You can see this image here is labeled. We have the segment, and then we have the setae labeled as those little bristles. Annelids have a closed circulatory system. Unlike the majority of mollusk species, with the exception of the cephalopods of course, the earthworm's blood vessels are connected and distribute blood throughout the animal. In terms of a nervous system, notice the cerebral ganglia that acts as an analogous brain in the chordate. The ventral nerve cord helps to concentrate the signal received by stimuli throughout the animal and direct it to the cerebral ganglia. You can also notice the segmental nerves, highlighting the ability of many of these animals to respond to their environment through individual rings. This level of organization allows these worms to coordinate swimming and crawling. While not notable for their high degree of visual prowess, most subterranean worms are negatively phototactic and are sensitive to mechanical and chemical stimuli. Lastly, we have the presence of organized excretory structures in the composition of metanephridia and protonephridia. These structures work very well to balance the water and ion balances inside of the worm. Again, notice how these structures are organized segmentally. Now we're going to take a close look at the relationship of annelids to other animals. Once again, we are examining an animal group found in the clade Lophotrochozoa. The Lophotrochozoans include Phylum Mollusca, Phylum Brachiopoda, and Phylum Bryozoa, as well as Phylum Annelida. Our phylum of interest belongs to this clade due to the presence of the trochophore larva and is highlighted in purple here. Phylum Annelida is interesting because it has undergone recent changes in its organization, which is important to discuss. Traditional taxonomy, as shown in this cladogram, has the annelids sharing a close relationship to the arthropods, which includes insects, crustaceans, spiders, etc., and it's our next unit. These relationships are mostly due to the presence of segments and protostome development. Morphologically, that makes sense. Both groups do share those adaptations, and mollusks do lack segmentation. However, recent DNA and molecular evidence has shed light on the origins of segmentation and suggests that segmentation, or metamerism, arose independently between annelids, arthropods, and chordates. That's the phylum that our species belongs to. We'll talk more about metamerism in part 2 of this video series. Here we have a side-by-side comparison between two representatives of annelid taxonomy, with the traditional relationship on the left and the modern relationship on the right. There's still a lot of work to be done in understanding the evolutionary relationships between these animals. Phylum Annelida is broken down into two major classes, class Polychaeta and class Clatellida. Class Polychaeta is the largest class of annelids and includes mostly marine animals. These worms have a head with eyes and tentacles, which afford these worms a wide variety of sensory capabilities than their subterranean oligochaete counterparts. Polychaete worms also bear fleshy projections called parapodia, which bear numerous setae. The parapodia have a wide variety of functions and can help facilitate gas exchange, anchoring down the worm, or even locomotion. Polychaete worms can be monoecious or dioecious, and may have a trochophore larva stage. Two famous examples of polychaete worms are the Naris worm, which we're going to take a closer look at later on in this unit, and the Riftia, marine tube worm. Class Clatellida are fewer in number than the polychaete worms, but generally more recognizable since they contain earthworms and leeches. Animals in class Clatellida have no parapodia and have few or no setae. These animals get their namesake for the presence of the clatellum, the area that kind of looks like a large rubber band or band-aid that's going to be facilitating reproduction. These animals are monoecious, with individuals containing both male and female sex organs. Within class Clatellida, we have subclass Oligochaeta. Now this is going to be including our earthworms. These animals do have a few setae, although lack as obvious a head as their polychaete counterparts. These are primarily freshwater animals, and there are even a few terrestrial species. Subclass Hirudinea includes the leeches. These animals have about 34 segments divided into annuli, or rings. All species have a posterior sucker and usually have an anterior sucker. The setae in these species are reduced or completely absent. Pictured here is the giant red leech, which is carnivorous. It's eating an earthworm. As you have probably seen by now, worms are a lot more diverse than you probably thought. Annelida is one of the major phyla that is constantly being re-examined as new information comes to light. Three other groups of worms that may have a close affinity with Phylum Annelida are the Sipuncula, or the peanut worms, the Echiura, or the spoon worms, or the Cyboglinidae, or the beard worms. The beard worms are currently a part of class Polychaeta, however they used to be listed as their own phylum. And that's it for this part of the lecture. We'll be resuming in part 2 to talk a little bit more about metamerism, tagmatization, and a little bit more about their specific adaptations for nervous, excretory, and reproductive capabilities. See you next time.